All right, thanks to one of your lovely classmates that sent me an email. I realized that I didn't post it so that you could see it. There's like 2 steps to the process. Like, one step is making the assignment link for you guys. The other step is putting it in the modules. So, you will see, actually it should probably show up on your to-do list, right? Turn in bonus, submitting exam questions. Or you could go to the modules, and I did add it there. So bonus submitting exam questions. So you would click on it, and I extended the deadline to Thursday. So, but hopefully at this point you guys had been writing out stuff, right, that you could. So you have a choice. When you hit submit assignment, it'll give you the option. You can click this tab, and you could just paste and copy right in, right? You could do that and probably even upload a file. I'm not sure if you could do both, but you definitely do have the option. So then you could browse on your computer and find the file and submit it that way. So there's 2 ways you can do it, right? So if you read the instructions, you can earn up to 10 bonus points to your homework percentage for submitting questions for use on exam 1. I'm looking for product rule, binomial expansion, and chi-squared questions, which I haven't even given you any chi-squared questions yet. And as I got to thinking about that, I was like, I want to see what they come up with before I give them one. So, and who knows, we might pick a couple and do them in class next week, right? Of the ones you guys submit, if I get any. But here's one of the ones that I had given you guys for homework, so I was just giving you an example, right, of the type of question. And so for this one, we've done this one, but this would be a good review for us, right? So cystic fibrosis is an autosomal recessive disorder that affects lung function in humans. A man and a woman are both unaffected heterozygous carriers of cystic fibrosis gene. If the couple has 2 children, what's the probability that their first child will be unaffected and their second child will also be unaffected? So how would you solve this? Chi-squared, product rule, or binomial expansion? Product rule. Does everybody agree product rule? Okay, cool. When you have a set of possibilities, so if we said, what's the chance that 3 out of their 7 children will be unaffected? No, product rule, there's 2 right here. This is where, remember, why can we use product rule for this? One, it's not a set, right? They're independent, right? Whether the first child is unaffected does not affect whether the second child is unaffected, right? They're not linked. Does that make sense? Michelle's still processing. It's okay. We're going to do more, so yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that on my student view for now and bop over to our lecture for today, which is not the problems, it is the lecture part 4. So we're continuing on these non-Mendelian inheritance patterns. So the next one we're going to look at is X-linked inheritance, sometimes also referred to as sex-linked, but the important thing here is that, it's on the X chromosome, which also determines sex, right? At least for humans. And then explain pseudo-autosomal inheritance, right? So pseudo, anyone know what that means when we say pseudo? False, right? So it seems like it's autosomal, right? That it's on not your sex chromosomes, right? Autosomal means everything but your 2 sex chromosomes. But in fact, if it's pseudo, where are these traits actually? If they're not autosomal, they're on your sex chromosomes. So you could almost say they're sex-linked. But the difference here is this information is found both on the Y and X chromosome. So what sex you are doesn't affect the inheritance. So because what sex you are doesn't affect, people think, oh, it's autosomal. But no, we now know, because the Human Genome Project, right, that there are some traits that are found both on the X and the Y chromosomes. Where traditionally, what's the problem with X and Y chromosomes? Or what's the difference between X and Y?
X is female and Y is male.
X is female and Y is male? You don't have any X chromosomes, Tyler?
2 X's means you're female.
Okay.
X and Y means you're male.
Okay, so 2 X's for humans is female, X and Y is male, right? Obviously the 2 X's look similar, right? They look like an X at mitosis, right? In meiosis, at metaphase, right? What did I say? Mitosis. But in mitosis, for the most part, until anaphase, where they start coming apart, right? In telophase, when they're actually apart. They look like X's, right? Because they're copy. The sister chromatids are next to each other. Why does the male one, though, look like a Y as opposed to an X? It's shorter. It has less information. It has less information. So keeping that in mind, right, it's got less information, so sometimes it doesn't have information, right? So instead that information is only on the X. So when that creates a problem for guys, right, because how many X's do they have? 1. It also creates a problem for their children, though, because how many X's do they have to give? 1, because they only have 1, right? And so we know, too, right, that the male is what determines sex, because it's whether he gives his X or his Y is going to determine what that child is. Where females, all we have is X's, and all we give is X's. Still with me? Okay. So, that's why it's X-linked, right? It's on the X, right? And it's not on the Y. So males and females differ in their sex chromosome composition, right? We just went over that. Certain traits are governed by genes on the sex chromosomes. X-linked shows that mostly males are affected, right? Because if it's on the X, they only have 1 X, right? So they're probably going to have it if they got that defective copy. They're going to have that particular disease or that have that particular trait. They have no backup copy, right? They only have 1 X. Where females, on the other hand, we have 2 X's. So a lot of times we're what are called carriers, right? We'll probably be heterozygous. Maybe we've got 1 good copy and 1 bad copy that gives you that disease or that particular trait. And then, of course, there's a 50-50 chance on whether we're going to pass it on to our offspring, right? Depending on which X we give them. If we're affected, though, right, that means that both of our X's, if it's a recessive trait, have it. So looking at this pedigree, remember, do you guys remember what the squares stand for? Male, and circles are females. So remember, when it's half shaded, right, it means that they're presumed to be heterozygous, basically a carrier. They don't have the disease, right? They're unaffected. So this is for muscular dystrophy. And the fact that the dad doesn't have it and the mom doesn't have it, but they ended up with a son that has it, kind of gives you a clue, right? Because remember, he got his Y from his dad. That's why he is a boy. So therefore, the defective trait for muscular dystrophy had to come from his mom. But because she doesn't have it, right, one of hers is good and one's not. Unfortunately, she gave the bad copy to her kid. So again, for the daughter, especially for these daughters that went on to have children with unaffected males, they ended up with affected males. Because, unfortunately, the 50-50 chance gave their poor boy the wrong X. That's how we were able to presume that they also got the crappy copy from mom, right? We don't know about this girl, right? Because she didn't mate. She might have got lucky. Or she might decided not to mate considering she had siblings that did and ended up with children with muscular dystrophy. But again, we could do what to figure this out? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 kids. What's the chances that they all have this trait? What would you do? Well, you have to do Punnett Squares for probability. And again, the probability is based on the mom who has 2 X's, so it'd be a 50-50 chance, right? But what's the chance that all out of the 4 kids have this disease, have the trait? Not have the disease, but have the trait. 3 independent events, but we're looking at a set, right? We're saying all of them in that set.
Binomial?
It would be binomial. Because it's dependent on the fact that you have 4 kids. What's the chance that all 4 of your kids are going to get this trait? No. You'd have to do binomial expansion. Because it's a set. And so it's the probability based on the fact that you're having 4 kids. What's the probability that all 4 are going to carry this trait? That would be binomial.
How would you word it if you were getting product?
So product rule.
I'm just trying to
Yep. Yep. Anybody, you think you have one, Tyler?
Actually, you think that all.
Oh, that just helps with not having to listen to me breathe. Thank you, Tyler. Yeah, because I hear talking. If anyone's this late, too.
Product rule will be like, what's the probability that the second child will have the trait?
Yeah, but that's only one probability. So it would be, what's the probability that the next boy will have the disease? And the
just
first,
one.
yeah, but that's still just one. So what's the probability that the first and second boy of these parents would have the disease?
So it's not all of the numbers in the set.
So you have
Right.
sense of positioning within the sets.
You have to not have a set, right? So if it has to be individual events. So if I say, what's the chance that the first and second boy have the disease?
So it's when you say how many kids there are total?
Right, when you have a set. So if you say, out of 7 kids, 3 of them have the disease.
Or you say out of 7 kids, what's the chance that they
All have the disease, right?
But what's the chance that they have 7 children who have the disease? Not the same.
Yeah, because the set is still 7. 7 kids that have the disease.
But 3 out of 7 isn't a set,
3 out of 7 is a set.
so that would be binomial.
That would be binomial.
So when would you use product rule?
When you're looking at each individually, what's the chance that you have one child that has the disease and a second child that has the disease, and you're not saying how many total. You're
So
not
you know
doing
the
it.
total, then it's binomial expansion.
Yeah.
You don't know the
If
total.
you have a set and you want to know how many within that set, then it's binomial expansion. If you're looking at multiple events together, then it's product rule. But the important thing is they can't be linked, right? They have to be independent events. Like the fact that one boy has it and the next boy doesn't isn't linked, right? Each time you have a child, there's that distinct possibility, or probability, I should say, that they would have it. So what is the probability for this example we've been talking about, that a boy would have the disease? And his mom's a carrier, his dad doesn't have it. 50-50. Everyone understand that? Okay, because the mom is going to give the boy one of her X's. One of her X's is bad. So he has a 50-50 chance of having the disease because it's only on the X chromosome, right? And his dad's not going to give him an X anyways because his dad gave him the Y. That's what made him a boy. Yes, no, maybe so. Okay. Moving on.
So this is the, in this particular example, it has to be dominant, for it to show up in the.
No. Dominant recessive.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. So at this case, it's recessive because if it was dominant, the mom would have the infection, would have the disease.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a recessive pattern of inheritance. I think there's one that, I don't know if we're going to do the example that is dominant. Can't think of it off the top of my head. I can't remember if it's in this. Yeah, we're going to have Punnett Squares on the test. No. Like, no more than 10. I promise. You can hold me to that. Well, you're going to have to fill it in, but there's going to be multiple choice next to it, too. Because you're going to be able to write on the test. But you're also going to fill out a Scantron. You're going to do both.
So, sorry to bring it back. I feel like I don't understand the difference. When we were doing those questions that were like, this man has 3 children, what are the odds that the second child will have the trait, and it was product rule.
Mm-hmm.
We knew how many kids he had, and it was only 1 child that we were.
Yeah, but we weren't asking within that set. We weren't saying within the set of 3, what's the chances that 2 are affected?
We weren't.
No.
Okay.
We're going to do more.
Okay.
And as you see, I'm trying to like work it in as we're doing this so that we can keep, having examples. And someone asked, and so that was great.
Yeah, so like her question, like if he had 3 kids and 2 were infected, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, but they're asking what are the chances that 2 will be affected out of the 3. You would have to say out of that set. Because then that being within that set factors into the probability. That's why you would have to do binomial.
That first one was saying how, what's the probability of the second child, and they don't even mention it.
Right.
Whereas the second question is saying, with this group of 3, what's the chance that the 2 of the kids will have that?
And they're saying out of that set of 3, what are the chances that 2 will have it? So they're keeping it within that context of this is the set that you have. So does that make sense?
So if it was worded out of the set of 3, we would say final information, but if it just says that he has 3 kids, we would do product rule. Because it's not dealing with, we didn't specify that we're looking at the set.
Right. Yeah, it's like statistics. It is statistics. Probability, that's statistics. Okay, so Punnett Squares of X-linked traits show different results depending on the sex that's affected, right? So we have to actually include the X's and Y's when we do the Punnett Square. So a male can transmit 1 X or a Y. We said this already. So an affected male and an unaffected female have no affected offspring, but females are carriers. Why is that? So the male is affected, right? So on his X chromosome is the trait for that disease, say. The mom doesn't have it. So, but all the females are going to be carriers. Because how did that female become female to start with? She's got 2 X chromosomes, right? Where did she get those 2 X's? One from dad, who has the disease, right? So therefore, she is a carrier because she got one good copy from mom. That's where her other X came from. Still with me? All right. An affected female and an unaffected male have all male offspring affected, and females are carriers. Because remember, if mom is affected, right, this is a recessive pattern of inheritance. Both of her X's, right, are defective. She gives those X's, that's the only X her boys get, right? Because they're boys because dad gave Y, not his X. So all her boys will have it. All her girls will be carriers because all she has to give are affected X's. Where dad isn't affected and he gave his X, that's how you ended up being a girl. Thank you, Dad, for your X, right? All us girls say, thanks, Dad, for the X. All the boys say, thanks, Dad, for the Y. Which is kind of funny considering boy ends in Y. All right, so muscular dystrophy, right? Recessive pattern of inheritance. So big D, right? You don't have it. Little d, you have it. So again, we got to write out the X's and the Y's. So in this case, the male has it, right? Female doesn't, right? And she's not a carrier. But all the girls end up being carriers, right? Because of dad. Because the only X he had, right, had it. Here, mom has got it, like we said, right? So defective copy, but dad doesn't. So all the girls become carriers because of mom giving the defective to them. All the boys have it because the only copy they got from mom was defective. That's all she had to give. So sex-linked is different than X-linked, right? X means it's on the X chromosome, and so it follows the pattern of the inheritance of the X chromosome. Sex-linked are those found on one of the two types of sex chromosomes, but not on both, right? So X-linked is hemizygous in males, right? Because they have an X, only one X, and they have a Y. They only have one copy. Hemi means one. And so therefore, as we saw, they're more likely to be affected. Because they only have one X. No backup copy. Y-linked, where the trait is on the Y chromosome, there's relatively few genes. As I said, it's smaller. That's why it looks like a Y instead of an X. This is referred to as halolandric. And this is only transmitted, of course, father to son. Girls have no worries because it's on the Y and we have no Y, right? So X chromosome, Y chromosome, right? Y is smaller. Well, you'll notice that these regions that are colored represent genes. Right, information. That's the same on both X and Y chromosomes. So each one of them has a yellow region, each one has a green, right? This is similar information. So for instance, the MYC2 gene. This one, as we said, is pseudo-autosomal, because most people, when they look at the pattern of inheritance, they believe that it's not on the sex chromosomes, because there's no difference between the sexes. There's no linking that we see. The reason for that is that information is found on both chromosomes. Got one more? No? I think it's just like a tapping type thing. Okay. So we'll do more, right? I'll give you homework problems. Okay.
Maybe like do them as many times as you want and not very.
Yeah, I think the ones for this I can set up in Connect. I was trying to remember the thing. Okay. So compare and contrast sex influence inheritance to sex limited. So what's the difference between its influence as opposed to its limited based on sex? And then, of course, be able to predict outcomes of crosses involving sex-influenced inheritance. So, as it implies, right, what sex you are influences that trait. So, in one sex, it may be dominant, where in the opposite sex, it's recessive. So can you guys think of any traits that males versus females where one has and the other does not? I know you could come up with several examples. Right? The Leo-Lingio, wow, anatomy. Right? So the what's that? What is that? The thigh? What bone is that?
It's like your thyroid cartilage, right?
Yeah, but it's more pronounced, the point to that in males than it is in females. So that's sex influenced, right? It's influenced by what sex you are. And I think it's a hormonal thing where the hormones tend to get that part. So they have the Adam's apple, right? That's the common name for the part, right? So yeah, that's one. So in males, it's dominant. In females, it's recessive, right? It's not more pronounced. Okay. So think of another trait. There's quite a few, y'all. Facial hair, right? Males have beards, right? Females usually don't. And again, I think that one might be sex hormone related. Okay. What was another one? Right, the size of the pelvis, right? Because women actually give birth, right? So it's wider. It is. Yeah, we'll talk about that one. You guys are missing like a major one, unless everyone's afraid of saying breastises. Mammary glands, boobs, tits, right? They're more pronounced in females because, again, that's how we feed the babies, and males don't have to feed the babies, right? Okay. Well, yeah, your sex determines whether you have ovaries or testes. No, you're right. That too, right? That's sex influenced. So, thus the sex influence is a phenomenon of heterozygotes. So it does not mean that it's sex-linked sometimes, right? So this is where definitely for mammary glands and facial hair, right, and even the Adam's apple, I think these are all ones that are influenced by sex hormones. So depending on what sex you are, the hormones will influence these traits. Well, if you take the opposite sex hormones, is this going to affect these traits? Absolutely. There are guys out there that have bigger boobs than I do because they take hormones. Right? So it's a guy, right? It's an X and a Y, but has natural boobs, right? Because of the hormones that women produce, they're taking. Huh? know. I don't know the particulars.
Well, I say that way.
Really?
My
Yeah.
kids don't.
Yeah.
I think some heavy duty antidepressants also,
Yeah, there's other drugs that will affect mammary gland size too. And obesity will too affect mammary glands too. Because, they're mammary glands and fat to, store energy to produce the milk.
Is that like a sex influence trait, like
Mhm.
amount of
Mhm.
fat?
Oh yeah, fat too. How much fat and where you keep it in your body is sex influenced as well. Yep. So they give you this weird example in the book, I guess, again, because they're afraid of talking about things like boobs and beards and I don't know. So they give you an animal example. So this is an autosomal gene, right? Which means it's not on the sex chromosomes, right? So the inheritance of this trait is on other chromosomes. But again, it's influenced by what sex the animal is. So this scurs, I guess, it's a horn-like growth that some cattle get that aren't ones that have horns. Normally, it's dominant in males but recessive in females. Okay? And I don't know why they picked the letters that they did. So you'd have to figure out, what their genotype is, but then you have to go one step further and figure out what sex they are to determine whether it would be expressed or not, right? So if they have the trait, they have both dominant forms, males will and females will have it. But it's the heterozygous that really will differ. Because now, instead of it being dominant, it's a recessive trait in females, so they won't have it if they're heterozygous, where the males will. And then, of course, if they're recessive, like non-dominant, they both won't have it. And so what it looks like is, you see these little bumps on the head? Like, kind of like baby horns, you could say. So for a male, of course, you want them to have horns for the most part, right? So they could, be aggressive, fight and whatnot. Females, you wouldn't really want them to have that, right? But if they have both of the dominants, it overrides, you could say, and they end up having that trait. Problem is this flip, right? Male versus female. So, it's confusing in the way that they write it. You have to basically flip it. I don't know how best to think about it. So, they write it dominant. You see how it's dominant, dominant?
So is this on like X chromosome?
No, that's the thing is, it's an autosomal thing, right?
Oh, okay.
So, but the sex influences. So for females, this is kind of repressed. So, you could think of it, like I said, for breasts, right? Everyone has mammary glands, right? But whether they develop, right, is influenced by what sex you are. So for females, right, our sex hormones influence that they're going to develop. So it's dominant in females, right? Males, it's very rare, and because in this case it's a hormone thing, we could do it from the outside and influence it by giving them the hormones. But there are some males that will develop mammary glands, and it could be genetic too, where for some reason they're producing female hormones and they're not supposed to,
So that would be like the top genotype, SDS, like both dominant.
Yeah.
producers.
This isn't I don't know the exact cases with breasts, but it's definitely influenced and it's definitely hormonal.
So are sex influence traits always influenced by hormones? Is that what we're saying?
No, for most of them, for us, yes. Yeah. But that's probably what's going on here too, right?
Okay.
Is where, we want the males to have these horns. So being male influences the fact that this is going to be the more dominant trait if you have it. So the difference really shows up in the heterozygote, right? Where, you know, it's going to be dominant for them, but recessive for the females. Where for breasts in males, it's going to be recessive. And for females, it's more dominant.
Between like the clitoris and the penis, because they're both anatomically the same,
Mm-hmm.
and that, do they become different structures almost, or is that also sex?
I would say it's sex influence, but I'm not
Sorry,
sure.
sex influence.
Yeah. We'd have to look it up to know for sure, if we even know. Okay, so there's influenced and there's limited, right? So this trait occurs only in one of the two sexes. So these are genes controlled by sex hormones or sexual development. This is not breasts though, right? Because, again, males have breasts. Just whether they develop or not is influenced by our sex, not limited. So if we start going limited, right, where it's only in one sex and not the other, we would talk about the development of ovaries versus testes, right? Okay. So a lot of times, of course, these are, of course, controlled by things that determine our sex, like hormones and the sexual development pathway. So in humans, like I said, females, right, because of the hormones that we produce, because of our sex chromosomes, we're going to develop ovaries instead of testicles, normally. And then males will... The default is apparently female, by the way. Like, if you're missing information, you become female. It's the male information that causes you to be male. Anyways, so ovaries for females, testes for males. In birds, what's the major difference you notice in birds related to their sex? Plumage, right? And who tends to sometimes, during mating season, have the most beautiful plumage? The males, right? They get to be beautiful, right? They have the ornate plumage. I should have added a picture. I thought there was a picture. Oh, it is. I got better pictures than this. I got a peacock who lives in my neighborhood. A male peacock that lives in my neighborhood. But they molt, and they lose their big, huge tail feathers after breeding season. So right now he looks kind of stubby. But when I first moved in, he still had all his plumage, which was really cool. But yeah, he pretty much thinks he owns my neighborhood. He's pretty hysterical. He just walks down the middle of the street, and everybody just waits for him. But yeah, I mean, what do we believe the reason for that?
To attract mates.
Right, to attract mates, right. But they're not always like that. Some of the birds, like not during mating season, they'll molt and they'll almost even look like females, so they too can camouflage and not be subjected to predation by predators. But some of them keep their plumage year round, even though they still molt, right? Replace their feathers. They get damaged. They gotta replace them.
Would that also be like size, like how some females are larger than males in certain like?
Yeah, but I would say that'd be more an influence, not a limited thing, right? Limited means only one sex has it. You guys understand the difference?
Like no female peacock is going to look like a male peacock.
Right.
But like men have mammary glands, they just don't develop.
Right. So that's influenced, not limited.
Right.
You got it. Okay, so now we're going to hopefully get through lethal. Alive, right? Lethal means dead, right? So if you inherit these, you will die. So, or you won't be born. Okay, so of course these are not very common, right? Because you die, you don't procreate. But of course, if you're heterozygous, you'll live, right? And you could pass it on. If you mate with another heterozygous, what's the chance that one of your kids gets it? If you're both heterozygous, 25%. 25%. All right, so predict how lethal alleles may affect the outcome of a cross and the probabilities of non-lethal phenotypes seen. So lethal is one that has the potential to cause the death of an organism, right? Not always kill you, but. So these are usually the result of mutations, right? So if something didn't get copied right, it gets passed on. Usually a recessive manner, right? Because again, otherwise, if it was dominant, he might wipe out 3/4 of a heterozygous cross. The homozygous, if it was dominant, would not exist, right? Because you'd be dead or almost dead. Essential genes are those that are absolutely required for survival. So in this case, if that gene screwed up, you're dead. Other genes that are non-essential, right, you could be at a disadvantage. So the absence of a protein that leads to a lethal phenotype. It is estimated that about 1/3 of all genes are essential for survival. So you only need 1/3 of them. The non-essential are those not absolutely required. And that's the thing is we've been looking at things at discrete units, right? Just like one thing, and right now maybe two things, sex affecting whatever trait we're looking at or being linked to that. In actuality, a lot of things that we can or can't do is more than a single gene, right? It's an interaction of several genes. So if several genes are wiped out, right, then you're running into problems, right? Because you'd be okay if one of the 3 out of a set doesn't work, but if you don't have all 3 of those, then we're looking at serious problems. Does that make sense? So some of them are non-essential because other genes will make up for not having that. Even though it's not exactly the same, it gets the job done. I don't know a specific example. I know you guys are obsessed about specifics. It's good though. I usually like to have a specific example, but I don't. Okay, so conditional lethal may kill an organism only when a certain environmental conditions prevail. So this is where, okay, you be okay, but in this particular environment, you're not going to be okay. So temperature sensitive lethals, right, where in a particular environment, you would be fine. You put you in a different environment, that temperature affects the expression or non-expression of this trait. So in Drosophila, right, which are fruit flies, if you incubate them at 30 degrees Celsius, they will die. It's too hot for them. Body temperature for us to give you an idea is about 37 degrees Celsius. So this is much lower than our body temperature, where room temperature is around 25 degrees. This 30 is about the temperature of your skin. 30 degrees Celsius. I don't remember the exact Fahrenheit, but it's cooler than us, but warmer than room temperature typically, of around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. But they'll survive if grown at 22 degrees. Typically, it's caused by mutations that alter the structure of a protein at the non-persistent temperature, right? So when you get too warm, these proteins that are necessary for them to develop don't form correctly at that higher temperature. And we know this about proteins, right? They're very sensitive to temperature. We use this to our advantage all the time to kill bacteria, right? We denature their proteins by heating them up, right? We glob them up, we coagulate them, we mess them up so they won't work anymore. Because most of the enzymes that catalyze your reactions are proteins. So if these guys get too warm because so much of their protein that they need won't form properly, they won't develop, they'll die. Semi-lethal genes, or alleles, kill some individuals in a population, but not all. It's like, okay, so clearly there's more going on here, right? So it could be environmental factors, or other genes may help protect some individuals, but not others. So because of the lethals, because they don't live or they don't live long, right? It may seem like Mendelian ratios, or definitely don't seem like Mendelian ratios that we're used to. That's because we're not going to have one to count, right? Because they're dead, or wouldn't develop. Does that make sense? So I can give you an example of a human disease that is most of the time lethal. It's abbreviated SCIDS. It stands for Severe Combined Immunodeficiency Syndrome. And what this does is that it affects the white blood cells, your lymphocytes, your B cells, and your T cells. You basically aren't able to make functioning B cells or T cells. So this basically wipes out your adaptive immune response. So if you do survive to birth, you are the bubble boy, right? Because you have no adaptive immune response. You're limited to innate immune response, which protection-wise puts you at severe risk of infection. So because that's such a severe defect, most children aren't even born. They die in utero. Does that make sense to you guys? So that I guess you can consider that semi-lethal and even somewhat environmental influence, because if the mom gets sick with anything that the baby doesn't have protection against, or if it's that severe, the development just shuts off. It's like, oh, we're not doing what we're supposed to be able to do.
That's a semi-lethal or
I don't know what it would definitely be classified as. But there's definitely an environmental factor, right? Because you could be born, but if you get something that you need your adaptive immune system for, it's going to kill you, right? And so, we're able to know enough that, a kid could be born and we could stick them in a protective bubble where they're not exposed to pathogens to try and keep them alive longer. So, the bubble boy, it's a movie, but, it's a real life condition. It really does happen.
I have a friend whose son has something similar to that.
Right.
And he has to go once a month and they pump him full of whatever they think is out in the world.
Uh-huh. They might give him antibodies. He might not produce a lot of antibodies. He might have aglobulinemia, which means he doesn't produce a lot of antibodies, or maybe none at all. And so they're probably giving him other people's antibodies to protect him from what's out there.
Yeah, he has to do it once a month to get to protect him from whatever's out in the world. Whatever's happening.
Yeah, because those antibodies deteriorate over time.
So maybe not exactly.
Yeah, and that would sound about right. So an example of a lethal is the minx cat. And so this is actually a dominant mutation that affects the spine. So this shortens the tail. This is why the minx cat has the short tail, right? Because it affects the spine, and the tail is an extension of the spine. Where again, we don't extend ours, even though you have one when you're an embryo. So the homozygous is lethal. It dies, right? Because the spine is so severely affected, right, that they don't live. Because you could end up being heterozygous, right, where you're going to live, but you just have the shortened tail. The problem is when you mate those two cats, you end up with other minks that have the shortened tail, but you could end up ones that die in embryonic development because the spine is too messed up. Where just having, one recessive isn't enough change, it just shortens the tail. Where you're going to also have cats, right, that don't have the trait, it is recessive, that are going to have a normal tail. They're going to be fine. The dominant is here where it affects the spine, and that's why those cats have the shorter tail. Where are we on this? The last slide. Because I wanted to go over a couple of examples of stuff. So, time when lethal effects exert can vary, right? Many lethal prevent cell division. So in that case, right, the organism would die at a very early stage in development. Some exert their effects later in life. Huntington's disease, right, is an example of that. And the unfortunate thing about that is that, that one's dominant. Yeah, that one's dominant. But the problem is it's later in life. So you don't realize you have it until you're an adult and you've probably already had kids. And so it causes progressive degeneration of the nervous system, dementia, and then eventually death. Have you guys seen the dementia singing guy on YouTube? Or he's been on Facebook. There's a guy, his dad has dementia. And for some reason, he remembers music. And so he has done all these YouTube videos of his dad singing in the car. And I mean, the dad has got this amazing singing voice. And apparently he just got this 80-year-old guy who has dementia has a record deal now. Which is awesome. But he was trying to raise awareness about dementia and stuff like that. It was pretty amazing. I thought it was really cool. So the onset for this is between 30 and 50 years of age. And again, the problem with that is you don't know until. And so they can test for it, right? And that's one of the other ones we need to look up to find out, or did we know that? Is that one on chromosome 4? And that's the one we know that's on chromosome 4. There was one other disease we've been talking about that we haven't found out. Cystic fibrosis. We need to find out what chromosome that one's on. And muscular dystrophy now, too, right? Is what? We just talked about it today. Muscular dystrophy. What was the pattern of it? X-linked, right? It's on the X chromosome. All right, I want to spend the next 10 minutes. Down syndrome is a different problem. It's where you get, well, it depends. It's also referred to as trisomy 23. We have 23 chromosomes, right? The X and the Y's. So trisomy means that you don't have just an X and a Y, you have 3 sex chromosomes. Is it 21? 21. Okay, it's 21. So you have 3 of 21 though. Trisomy meaning 3. So you have 3 of them. That. Yeah. Yeah. So basically what the problem usually is mom accidentally gives both her copies of 21 instead of just one. And then dad gives us 21, so then you end up with 3 21s, and that's too much information and it screws the system up. In simplest terms. But I think we're going to get to that one in chapter 8. Okay. So these are straight from your book, right? Concept questions. Number 9. So we went over this. Let's see if you guys remember this one. Way back at the beginning. So remember, for blood types of the ABO blood group, what special dominance pattern are we dealing with here? How do you end up, what is AB? Codominance. Excellent. Right, so we end up with codominance. The question is asking you which blood phenotypes, A, B, or O, provide an unambiguous genotype. So, if you are type A, what is your genotype? AA or AO? Still with me? What about B? BB or BO? AB, we know your genotype, right? AB. If you're O, OO. So A and B are unambiguous. You don't know, based on their phenotype, what their genotype is, right? Still with me? It could be one or the other. So we'd have to do crosses, right, to figure it out. Punnett squares, right? Is it possible for a couple to produce a family of children with all 4 blood types? Yes. What would be the genotypes of the parents? AO and BO, right? We did that Punnett square before. Do you guys remember it? Okay. All right. I'm trying to remember. Hopefully the book didn't time out on me. So that was number 9, right? Yeah, number 9, it doesn't give you the answer. All right, number 10, it does. So I'll write out 9 for you guys, just in case you're embarrassed and don't want to admit right now that you don't fully understand. Okay, so we'll write it out. I've written it out before, so I just did paste and copy. Okay, a woman with type B blood has a child with type O. What's the possible genotype and blood types of the father? So mom is B. And the child is O. All right, let's do it. I gotta steal me a Punnett square, just so we can fill it in. Where's my homework 2? Steal a Punnett square. One other time when I did this, it didn't work. So I hope it works. New slide. Nope. I don't know what I do wrong. Oh, I'll just steal the slide. Copy. All right. I'm just gonna fill one of them in. Okay, so the kid is O. So what would we write here? O. For all of them, right? Just to make it easier for filling this in. Okay, So if the kid is O, he had to get what from each parent? An O, right? So one parent has to have an O, another parent has to have an O. Well, mom is what blood type? BO. She's got to be BO, right? Everyone still with me? This is where we talked about that unambiguous problem with B. Okay? But you know if you're BO if you end up with kids with O, right? Okay, what could dad be? He could be double O, AO, or BO. Father could be. Oh, could not be, right? But that's not what they asked, right? Okay, but they told you anyways. So they say he can't be AB or BB or AA, right? We figured out he's got to have an O, right? So he's either O or AO or BO. Okay, you guys are going to like this next one. Number 11. So, number 11. So, a type A woman is the daughter of a type O father and type A mother. Okay, so let's write that out first, right? So, I don't know why I even did that. Just because it's, well, no, I'll fill those in later. Okay. I forget I have to be in this view. Okay, so what did we say? Let's read it again. Type A mom and O father, and she's type A. So dad is O. She is A. But we don't know if she's AO or AA, right? So there's the two possibilities. So we could have this, right? Because dad gives O's. Mom could give O's, but mom had to give her the A, right? That's where she got her A. Everyone agrees about that? Okay. So, oops, I have no idea what I just did. I just wanted to delete the letters, not everything else. Oh, that's what I did. I hit backspace instead of delete. There we go. All right, so dad is still going to be the same, OO, right? But mom could be AA, right? And the daughter is still going to be A, right? And in fact, all the children in that case would have to be A, right? But they would be heterozygous. Oh. All right, so let's move on to the next part of the problem. Okay, so if she has children with an type AB man, what are the following probabilities? Okay, so let's first figure out her cross. So she's mating with a Mr. AB. Problem is, and she definitely has one A, right? We just don't, this other one's a question mark, right? Is it A or is it O? But I was just going to say, do we have enough information to figure out what she is?
Yeah, she's A O. Because all the crosses.
Oh,
she's
yeah.
A. And all the crosses are AF.
Right. So, yes, all are all AO. Yes, thank you. I knew. I was like, I think we had enough information. I was just getting ahead of myself. Okay. So that gave us enough information that no matter what we did for her mom, she is going to end up AO because her dad just gives her O. And she has to have the A from her mom. Perfect. Yay. Isn't this fun? You guys are all like, yeah, no. Okay. So then when we fill this in, right, we end up with, right, a 50-50 chance they end up with A, 25% that they're B, or 25% they're AB. So this is just one probability. So for AB, it's 25. For O, it's 20. Oh, no, O is 0, right? 0%. You get no O's. Now, the first 3 children have type A blood. AB blood. Product rule. A family composed of 2 children with type B blood and 1 child with type AB. Binomial expansion. 11 is not on there. But I will type it up for you guys. Because we're definitely over time. But I appreciate your patience. And I need to get whoever was listening